And that's not really my position in the rank that I'm in, but I knew that it wasn't going to work. Couldn't figure out how to get out, and I had gone through walls in my house. So I do PT in the morning, and then I go on lunch. Sometimes I go out.
Well, hey, welcome back. My name is Evan. You know, one of the things when we think about trauma is that trauma is oftentimes something that pushes us or helps us sort of lead ourselves down to the lowest points in our lives. Call them valleys, call them whatever you want to. But when you're down there, sometimes it can feel like it is a long ways back up. And for a lot of people, when they do get to a valley, it's one of the most lonely and isolated places they can be. And they feel like a lot of times there's people up on the top of the hilltops shouting down instructions, trying to tell them how they can climb out of the valley. But there's nothing more frustrating, is there, than someone sitting up on the top of the hill who hasn't been in the valley telling you how to get back on top of the hill. See, sometimes it takes somebody who's willing to climb down in the valley with you, or who's already been there before, who can say, you know what, I've been where you've been, but here I can show you some of the ways out. But see, it has to start with someone who's willing to be intentional about making a decision that the valley's not where they want to stay. And that's actually what we're going to talk about today, is what are some tangible things you can do, whether that's you or someone you love who's gone through trauma or had a painful experience. What are some things you can do to make sure the valley doesn't become like the new slum apartment complex that you move into, that you make your new home? How do you make sure that it's someplace that, yes, maybe you pass through? You know, we're going to really build off of the idea on Psalms 23. Do I walk through the valley of the shadow of death? It doesn't say that I walk into and stay there. And so I've got Ryan with me today. Thanks, Ryan, for being here. We're excited to talk about this. Ryan's got a super fascinating story. We're going to kind of go through a couple different sections of his story today, and hopefully you'll learn some of the things in his story that he's done to sort of bring him to where he's at today. And you'll be able to translate and say, how does that apply to my own situation?
Okay.
Awesome. So before we kind of get into what happened best, let's talk about life today, right? So you're a husband, right? You guys have been married how long?
10 years in April.
10 years. Awesome. And you've got 2 kids, 2 boys, right? And 3 on the way. You got triplets on the way.
Forget that, man.
Nope, he does not have triplets on the way. You heard it first here, right? So, okay, before that, you had a pretty long career in the Army, right? You were in the Army for 8 years and then the Guard after that.
Right.
So tell us first off, how old were you when you joined the military?
I was 19 years old.
19. So you went down to the recruiting station and you said, sign me up. Was this after 9/11?
This was post 9/11.
Yeah, and so you went down to basic training. How soon after you enlisted did you first deploy?
I deployed for the first time in 2010.
Okay, so
it would
pretty
have been,
soon
I guess,
after.
May. Yeah.
Yeah, and did you go to Afghanistan or Iraq?
I went to Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. Okay, so you're how old at this point? Like 20?
I was just after my 21st birthday.
Yeah, so you're a 21-year-old kid off to Afghanistan for the first time as a driver. So first deployment, there's got to be a couple moments that stick in your head as these are real low points. These are real valleys for you, right? And those valleys, while they were maybe single incidences or single days, right? I mean, they would impact your future in pretty profound ways, right? I mean, those things would carry on. When you were experiencing those valleys, did you at the time acknowledge the impact they were having on you?
There was just no time for that.
No time. You just basically, Charlie Mike, keep pushing.
And anybody that was as a part of that deployment or in the area at the time will tell you, we had a tremendous amount of casualties. We had people pretty much every week, if not every couple of days, we were on blackout because somebody was getting flown out for a life-ending, they had been killed.
So the deployment was what, 9 months, 12 months?
12 months.
12 months.
A little bit of change.
So on your way home, you're thinking, thank God I'm alive. I can put my feet back on American soil.
Yeah.
And so you land. And at what point does your relationship with your now wife start to sort of grow?
I would actually say that it didn't really grow much for a couple of years. I came home. We got pregnant before I left for that deployment. I came home, and my oldest child was 7 months old, and so we had to transition into that. But even then, I came home. We went out to different trainings and field exercises in JRTC,
and he was born while you were deployed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we went right back into our training cycle, and my wife Chelsea and I, we spent as much time as we could, but my focus was on, I saw how things were in 2010. I had enough time that I knew that I wasn't going to miss the next deployment before I got out, and so my focus was on getting myself prepared. And there was a lot of newer guys that were coming in, because after 2010, everybody said, that's it. I'm done with the Army, I'm getting out.
And then you find out, okay, coming up on order, second deployment, going to Afghanistan again. Volunteer. Okay, so you actually you opted to go.
Yeah, we'd essentially been given this mission to train the Afghans into roles that maybe they were vaguely familiar with, so they could take over their part in the country and take over security. I was a counter-intel advisor to an Afghan commander, which is a very strange position for me to be in. I had good mentors,
right.
And I had good NCOs above me that helped me transition into that. But after about month 6, you start to really realize that the Afghans weren't really interested in taking control. I think they kind of sensed that they wouldn't be doing that for some time, and so you felt like I volunteered for it, and so I was really motivated to go and be a part of that, and to see, one, that they weren't interested, and then to two, start feel like people are still dying. We had around that time we had a big IED in one of the farther north provinces that took out a brigade commander and several of his high-ranking aides.
Wow.
And or brigade sergeant major and some of his high-ranking aides. And just thinking, one, I volunteered for this. Two, they're not interested. And three, people are still dying for something that these people aren't even interested in their own country.
Wow.
And it just felt, worthless.
Yeah.
And that was actually when I started
spiraling
a little bit. Yeah.
So then you had one more deployment. Now tell me, when did that deployment happen?
That was in 2014.
14. Okay, and did you sign up for that one, or was that just because of the rotation?
That I was voluntold for.
Voluntold, so you had to go to that one. So tell me, you mentioned the word spiral earlier.
Yeah.
So you said your spiral kind of began really when you started to realize these people didn't want the responsibility that you felt like you were sacrificing to give.
Yeah, I had talked with leaders that, and they empathized with me that, man, like, what are we doing here? Like, why are we wasting our time with this? And, we try and patch up things as much as we can, but it's, you can't force certain men to do, what they don't want to do. And so a lot of it was private. And then after that, it became a thing of, well, you did these great things on this deployment, and you became resentful of your leadership because, like, that I didn't do great things on the deployment. Like, that we didn't do anything that was meaningful.
Right.
And then, watching them ramp up other people for other deployments. Oh, we're going to do all this stuff. And you're like, no, you're not, because I just came from that, and it was terrible, and it was ultimately meaningless, for me, at least.
Yeah.
Not worthless for the people that sacrificed.
No, I understand.
Right. And so then it became a much more visible thing to where, I had gained some rank at that point in time, and I was quite verbal with some of my leadership that I didn't agree with the way that the soldiers were being taught. I didn't think that they were adequately prepared for the next deployment.
So, downward spirals beginning. What were some of the things that you started to see in your life now, looking back, that were sort of warning signs that you should have probably thought, okay, you know what, something's off here?
Probably anger was my biggest one, to where I would try and compartmentalize things and keep them, in their box as much as I could, but that would leak out, when I couldn't anymore. And so I would, I'd have outbursts, or like I talked about where I was talking with my command, they said, we're going to do it this way, and I'd say, these are guys that have, years on me, maybe decades in some cases, and I'd say, that's not going to work. We tried that. You need to do something else. And that's not really my position in the rank that I'm in, but I knew that it wasn't going to work, and so I found myself less able to control the things that I was thinking without verbalizing, because I really did care, a lot about my job, and but then there were other things too where I would get home and I'd notice things like the laundry wasn't folded, and it's still something that I actually deal with now, just a little bit more manageable. But I'd see stuff on the floor, and it just make me so anxious and angry that this is something so simple that could be fixed and alleviate a whole lot of stress for me.
And just zero tolerance.
Right. Just zero tolerance.
Yeah, and zero margin for error or for grace. What were the behaviors? What were the things that you did to try to fix it, to try to cope?
I exercised a lot. I worked out, daily, sometimes twice a day. Sometimes I go on lunch. I do PT in the morning, and then I go on lunch. Sometimes I go after. I drank a lot more.
Yeah.
I started engaging in more risk-taking behaviors and things like that.
Was there a point for you that you felt like was rock bottom?
Yeah.
This was a breaking point. What was that like for you?
In 2000, and I guess this would have been 2000, between my second and third deployments, I had a night where I was having a bonfire with some friends, and I had a little bit too much to drink. And I had a lot of nightmares after 2010, and that night, for whatever reason, and alcohol probably certainly played a factor. They didn't stay in, and I, got up in the middle of the night. I actually had cornered my wife in my bedroom, and I wasn't conscious of any of it. And somehow I locked myself in the bathroom. And long story short, I couldn't figure out how to get out, and I had gone through walls in my house, gone through a door, like literally through it, like kicked and punched through this door, and chased her and my son down the street. And that's what I woke up to. I woke up to my team leader, who I had called somehow, or somebody had called him, and my neighbor basically holding me down in my living room. Yeah, that was probably the lowest point in all of that. Early on in Reboot in 2015, when I went through the course, I learned about not staying in that valley, not staying in that place, and you have to be intentional about saying, okay, this really sucks. This isn't a place that I want to be. I need to keep pushing through that. And a couple of days ago, I was having a rough day, like a really rough day. School had me worked up and all sorts of other stuff. I had bad headaches, and I see my 8-year-old and my 3-year-old, and my wife is off doing something for work. And I just, like, in that moment, I decided, all right, well, I can't really go out right now because I feel like garbage. Let's make a blanket fort, and it's a simple thing, maybe a goofy dad thing, but just taking those times where you intentionally take time, even if you're not feeling great, because I didn't really feel great through that whole process, but I was intentionally spending time with my kids and with my network of support, even if it's just my kids, and getting that time to where I'm going to continue to do life regardless of how I feel. And then we see a day like today where I've been in the sweet spot with my wife and with my kids for a couple of years now, but during those days it didn't feel like that. It felt like the world was just going to come crashing in on me. Recognized that, got through it, and today's a great day because we worked through that and we kept just living through it. So
if you're watching at home, right, just to kind of wrap up our conversation today, I think there's some amazing takeaways here. I think that's one of them, is sometimes the thing you least want to do is the thing you most need to do. And so if you're in that place today, or if you are loving or caring for someone who's in that place, maybe that's one of the first things to recognize, is to at least call that out and identify and say, you know what, I'm going to have to make some super intentional choices, not because I feel like it, but because I need to do it. That's the first thing. The second one is, I think, really recognizing that in that valley, that it can get really comfortable.
Oh yeah.
Living in that place of depression.
Miserable but comfortable, easy.
Yeah, miserable and comfortable. Yeah, but that's not meant to be a place. Again, Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley, right? I think also something that you said is every day still a struggle, it's up and down. We talk about this, that it says, though I walk through the valley, right? You can't jump out, you can't skip out, you can't leap out, you can't sprint out, right? You have to walk out. And so if you're feeling discouraged, maybe you're a Vietnam veteran, maybe you're, I don't know, and maybe you still have some symptoms that still linger and persist. But I think the amazing part of this story is that doesn't mean you put your whole life on hold. It doesn't mean you have to wait to get well before you can go on your life. You can live a life full of purpose and joy and meaning in spite of those symptoms, right? By engaging in your life as it is today.
Yeah.
Right? You still got mountains and valleys all the time. Mm-hmm. But we talk about Paul and how Paul said he's learned to be content in all things, right? And so if you think about most of Paul's writings, although he had plenty of mountains and valleys in his life, he still managed to somehow focus on his contentment in spite of those things. And so that's a challenge for us and for you at home. What does it look like to be content, to say, God's got it? And I think that starts with really letting our behaviors be informed by our beliefs versus our behaviors informing our beliefs. So if we say to ourselves, I believe God's got it and He loves me, therefore I'm going to respond in these ways, that's a very different conversation than I'm going to respond in these ways as a way to cope with the pain and to let that shape what I believe about myself. AKA, I start drinking, I let my family down, my belief changes, I'm a loser, life is no good, right? And that creates a vicious cycle of destruction. And you can actually break that cycle by instead saying, what are the core beliefs? What are the things that you're going to do? Writing those things down, setting them as goals for yourself. So, Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for watching this today. As always, if you want to join one of our combat trauma healing courses, go to rebootalliance.com. You can click join a group, or maybe you want to start a course in your own community. We'd love to help you do that. Thanks so much.
With over 10,000 titles, it would be impossible for us to show you everything on Pureflix.com. But let's give it a shot.